Good afternoon, everyone.
Now they're like.
Welcome to the Center for Teaching Excellence. My name is Augie Grant. I'm the director of the center. My privilege to welcome you all here. I trust you've had a chance to pick up a snack or a soft drink and enjoy having a full house. One of the most pleasurable things for me is noticing 5 minutes ago the first area that filled up was the front of the room. That tells us something when we're all trying to learn. The other thing that is really enjoyable about being on this campus in this position is we are surrounded by people who bring knowledge and expertise and things that we've never had a chance to be exposed to before, whether it's music, whether it's math, whether it's philosophy or linguistics, and having a chance here at CTE to bring in perspectives, to give us all an idea about how we can better work with each other. Hello. I think that was an open microphone. Anyway, I do want to give you one logistical note because we are live streaming today's presentation. We do have, for those of you in the front of the room, microphones, but if you are past the first two rows and you want to talk, when you raise your hand, Xavier will bring you this microphone so that the people who are watching remotely can hear what you're saying, because we want to make sure that your voice is included with everyone else's. So again, it's great to have you here, and it's great to have Archie Crowley with us. Archie is a PhD candidate in linguistics here at USC. Their work centers around the linguistic practices in the trans community and the language ideologies that underlie both individual language choices and the broader linguistic activism of the trans community. They're an instructor in first-year English, and they are committed to making this campus, your campus, a more inclusive place through their work as a Safe Zone facilitator and a member of the Diversity and Inclusion Committee for the College of Arts and Sciences. Archie, the floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. I'm so excited that there are so many people here. I was getting all those emails, I'm sure you were, about it being really full and make sure you're coming. And I was like, oh my goodness, I'm so excited that so many people want to talk about this and think about how we can make our classes more affirming spaces for our trans students on campus. Like Augie said, my name's Archie. I use they, them pronouns, and I am in linguistics. And so yeah, I'm really excited to get started and talk about all of this with you today. So the goals for this workshop are that you all should be able to kind of define some key terminology. I just want to make sure that we're all on the same space, that we have a common language to talk about these issues. Importantly, to describe strategies for creating an inclusive environment for trans students, and then to be able to locate resources for trans students. And so we only have 50 minutes, which is not a lot of time, and every situation in every classroom you will be slightly different, so different sizes. And so hopefully this will be a starting point for you to think about these issues, to start a sounding board of starting to think about ways that you can make your classes more affirming. But we won't be able to talk about every scenario, but hopefully they will be a way for you to start thinking about these strategies to advocate for trans students. Okay. And so the plan for today is to just kind of briefly go over some ground rules for the space, to talk about terminology, and then to spend some time, most of the time, talking about tips for you in the classroom. So before the first day, on the first day, and then throughout the semester, things that you can do to make your classroom an affirming space for trans students. Then to kind of point you towards some resources that you can use, and then to spend a good amount of time discussing various scenarios so that you can practice thinking about how to implement this information and knowledge into actual scenarios that you might encounter. So first, we're here to learn, and so if you do have a question or want to clarify something, please raise your hand and ask. If you're on the live stream, I think there's a way for you to type it in, and then they'll bring the question up to me, and we can address that question so everyone can hear. So feel free to do that anytime. If you are sharing a story, please speak from your own experience without generalizing. And when you're listening to other people's experiences, listen to understanding the perspectives that they're coming from as we're trying to work through some of these ideas together. If you want to like pull apart some ideas, focus on criticizing the ideas themselves and not the people who are talking. And if we do share personal stories and you're leaving the space, take the lesson, so what you learned from what experience was like, but not the personal information and the stories and people that they belong to. Sound good? Okay. So now we're going to start off with some of the terminology, and that's in your handout. And just to make sure, so this was probably review for some of you, but I just want to make sure that we're on the same page. So sex is a collection of biological characteristics such as reproductive anatomy, chromosomes, hormonal makeup, and gene expression that often get presumed to be sorted into two categories, right? But that is infinitely more complex than that through the combinations of all of these things, as well as intersex identities that are not like sorted into male and female, right? But as we'll talk about, people do get assigned a sex at birth, and so that kind of perpetuates this idea that there are two categories here. And something that gets mapped onto that is gender, right? So gender being a socially constructed set of norms and values based on the ideas of being a man or being a woman. And so that also gets kind of understood broadly as there are these two categories, which is not accurate, right? Sexual orientation is separate from that, being the identity regarding the gender or genders that a person is attracted to. Then you have your gender identity, which is a person's own self-defined internal sense of self with regards to these ideas of gender. And also you have gender expression, which is a person's behaviors, interests, and outward appearance associated with a gender in particular cultural contexts, usually within these categories of femininity and masculinity. And so you have these presentations of the self that are often tied to understandings of gender, but don't necessarily reflect a person's held gender identity. Okay. So hopefully that just kind of gets you off started with where we're kind of thinking about how we understand gender to work. And then within the trans community, there are lots of different identity labels that we use to talk about our own experiences of gender in the world. But I'm just going to start with a couple so that I don't overwhelm you, and a couple things I think are most important for you to know. So there is the term transgender, or often shortened to trans, which is usually what I say, which is an umbrella term or an encompassing term of many gender identities of people who don't identify or exclusively identify with the gender that's associated with the sex they were assigned at birth. People who are not trans are cisgender. They can all appear. So that's a term for people who exclusively do identify with the gender associated with the sex they were assigned at birth. And it's also shortened to cis. Then you have non-binary, which is an umbrella term in and of itself that is often referred to talk about people who have genders other than woman or man. And that can include identities like genderqueer, gender fluid, agender, and not all non-binary people identify with the label trans necessarily, but many do.
Sorry.
Yes.
Agender is equivalent to cisgender, and agender is not.
No, so an agender person is a person who does not have a gender identity. It's like a, like the prefix meaning not having a gender, right? And then cisgender is a person who was like, when this person was born, the doctor went, it's a girl, and that person their whole life was like, I am a girl. So, and that's like a lot of people's experience, but not everyone. Is that good? Yes, the slides will be available for everyone. Yeah, I believe that's true. And then another kind of, I think, one that's really useful as far as thinking about the way we talk about sex and gender is the acronyms AFAB and AMAB, which are short for assigned female at birth and assigned male at birth. And it's a way of getting away from phrases like biological male or female, male and female bodied, and born male or female, which kind of are inaccurate and don't fully capture what it means for trans people to have their identities, right? And it also kind of emphasizes the fact that when you were born, you were assigned a sex, right? And you had nothing to do with that. It was like a coercive action that was done, and so that it's kind of like pulls apart the sense of like I was assigned this sex, but that is not like my identity. Okay. Any questions about any of the terminology so far? Great. And so now I want to talk about some caution words. These are words that like have a lot of historical context, a lot of cultural baggage that go with them, and so they're not necessarily words that like they might be things that you do see in the world or you do hear, but when you think about using them, and maybe in your classrooms or in contexts that you're in, you should think about like the effect that that might have on a person hearing it, who you are as a person when you are using it, and your positionality in that. And so just take them with caution. The first one being transsexual. So this historically was the preferred umbrella term for the trans community, but has since kind of gone out of favor as more people have used the word trans or transgender to talk about the community more broadly. And there are lots of individuals who do identify as transsexual, but the move has been pushed because a lot of people think that the word transsexual like puts too much of an emphasis on the medical aspect of transition, which is not something that all trans people want or desire to do. And so it has been like disfavored as the use for the whole community, for the word for the whole community. There's also these two, which is transgendered and a-transgender, which both are very like othering words, right? Transgendered implies that this is some sort of like verb that like process has been done to you. You have been transgendered, or a transgender creates this like object that like you are this a transgender, right? And so the more commonly words used in practice would be to say a transgender person, or a transgender man, or a transgender woman. And so avoiding those or being aware that those are can be come across as very othering if used. There's also the T slur, which is a slur that is very like, distressing for a lot of trans people to hear, and I don't feel comfortable saying it. So if you don't know what it is, feel free to Google it and then just not use it because it's historically been used specifically against trans women. And so that is something that of these to not use, right? But to be aware that it is a slur and it has those effects when it's used. Then similarly, like what we were talking about in the previous slide, the phrases biological male, male or female bodied, or born male and female, again, kind of creating this like link between what does it mean to be a biological male or female. Lots of people have different types of all those things we talked about, sex, like hormones and like anatomy and all of those things. So preferred to use like AMAB or AFAB, or assigned male at birth or assigned female at birth. And then the last one is a phrase that was in super common use fairly recently, which is the terms preferred pronoun and preferred name. But they are dispreferred now because they imply that like a trans person's pronouns are a preference and not like reality and not like obligatory. So it also creates this distinction whereas cis people have names and pronouns and trans people have preferred names and pronouns, but the reality is that we all just have names and pronouns that we want to be called and should be called. So the move has been towards using just pronouns and names.
Yeah. Asking what is your preferred pronoun or what is your preferred name?
Yeah.
So what is the question?
You could say like, oh, like what's your name? Just like you would to any person whose name you don't know. Or what pronouns do you use? Or what are your pronouns? I think are all fine variations of that.
Like, what are your pronouns?
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Okay, so now that we have all of that, so thinking about the situation that our students are coming into campus and into our classrooms with, a lot of students, for them, that college is the first time that they have the ability to explore their own gender identities, which is great. There's a level of independence there. They're coming to explore that part of themselves. But there's a lot of stressors that come with that. And studies have shown that trans students are between 2 and 4 times more likely to experience mental health struggles than their cisgender peers on campuses. And that's due to a lot of factors, right? Students might be facing issues such as access to housing, accessing health services, trying to get appropriate name and gender information on their IDs, broadly facing transphobia, harassment, violence, and issues about safety. misgendering inside and outside the classroom, as well as potentially facing police brutality and incarceration, homelessness, discrimination, also navigating family and peer acceptance as they explore their identities, as well as issues of accessibility, such as bathrooms on campus. And so there's a lot of things that these students potentially will be facing and dealing with in their lives when they come into your classroom. And we can't necessarily address all of that, and we can't do it in 50 minutes, but what we want to talk about now is ways that when they do come into your classroom, how you can make that space an affirming place for them to be so that they have the ability to fully participate and engage and learn in your classrooms. Okay. So before the first day, there are things that you can do before any student ever even steps foot into your classroom. For example, thinking about your syllabus. What's on your syllabus? Do you have students read, watch, and study trans scholars? Where are they in your field? Some of you might be coming from fields where issues in trans studies are incredibly relevant to the course content that you're teaching, and how can you incorporate that in a meaningful way? Some of you might not be in classes where trans studies are the focus or related, but maybe there are trans scholars doing work that is relevant to the class you're teaching. How can you incorporate that into the content that you're providing to your students? Do you have information about diversity and inclusion on your syllabus? In the course policies, there's places for that kind of thing. CTE has some templates that you can use and that you can go in and edit and make sure that you are kind of putting this forward to your students, that you care about making this classroom a safe space for your students, and that you are there and recognizing that they are in your classroom. Some people like to do a pre-class survey of your students' information. We'll talk more about the surveys and stuff in a second. But if you do a survey before the start of class, you can always include asking questions about students' names and pronouns in that. And as well as OMSA has a service in which students can alert their professors about their name and pronouns. And some students will also choose to just email you about their name and pronouns as well. And if you get an email like that, I would highly, highly recommend, or I would please respond and acknowledge that you got it. For example, I had emailed a professor letting this professor know about my name and my pronouns, and I hadn't heard back, and so I get into class on the first day, and this professor starts to call roll. And I'm like, okay, don't know what I'm in for, panic. And this professor had gotten my email and said my name in front of the class and didn't misname me, right? But there was that moment of panic could have been avoided if the professor had just been like, yes, got it, great, glad to have you in the class. And if you're in a class where you have a large lecture, to forward that to the TA, that is relevant information for, so that they can also use the name and pronouns of the students. Questions about any of those? Then you get to the first day, and the first day is the place where a lot of people think about these kind of issues in their classroom, because there are you're getting to know your students, and you want to figure out how to do that and get the information that you need about them. But I want to implore you all to always assume that there is a trans student in your class. You never know. They might not disclose that to you, but you should operate under that assumption. So if you do call roll, yes, there's a question.
Someone says it the idea of including trans scholars in their work, but how do you avoid the issue of tokenism, or at least the appearance of tokenism?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think that it can be hard as if you're just plopping this in on 1 week, this is the week where we talk about diverse issues, I think. So you want to start thinking about how are interrogating your own practices in that, and how is that a part of your whole class content, not just 1 week thing. And so is this something that is, if you are just plunking it on 1 week, it'll seem like you're just plunking it on 1 week, right? But if you're thinking about how these issues kind of are in conversation with the issues of your class, then that's you kind of rethinking and formulating the whole class itself, right? And it potentially might still come across as tokenism, but it's also important to include those voices. What are you doing if you just don't include it because you're afraid it will look like tokenism? Okay. So calling roll. If you have to call roll, try and maybe use last names. But better, wait until you have collected the names from them so that you are saying the names that they want to be called out loud in class. And there's a variety of ways to do that. So I know a lot of people use like student surveys as a place to ask names, pronouns, and any information like relevant to your class. Like from linguistics, a lot of linguistics classes will ask like, what is your language background? And that's like information that's relevant to the class. And so whatever that might be for you, you can include that in a survey like this. There's lots of different strategies. Some people use like an online survey. I had a professor do like a Google form. Some people just post like a list of questions on Blackboard to respond to. I use like an in-class worksheet, but my students fill out that I printed out for them. Some people use like an index card where they just like have students write on the index card right in class. There's a lot of different ways that you can do that, whatever kind of feels right for your teaching style that you can kind of apply in the classroom. And there's a couple examples like of different types of wording in your handout. So some of them are more detailed than others that include questions about like what pronouns and then in what context those pronouns should be used, which is important if a student wants to potentially disclose their identity to you, but doesn't want the rest of the class to know. Also, some of the survey examples use like checkboxes. I have had the experience of leaving it like, what are your pronouns? Leave a blank, and people don't really know sometimes what pronouns mean. And so I teach freshmen. I want to just kind of like ease them into this practice. Maybe they're not used to like the idea of going around and doing names and pronouns, and so having that those options there allow them to be like, oh yeah, I guess I use he/him pronouns. I didn't like know about that, right? And another thing to consider is how you'll cross-check with university documents. So I have small classes, and so I print out the photo roster. And when a student tells me their name, I just make sure that I'm looking at the person who I'm looking at, and I don't ever ask them to tell me their legal name. But if you're in a larger class, or maybe you don't have a photo roster, then you can if you do ask them what is your name on the roster, and then what name do you want to be called in class as a potential other option. So there's things to think about the implementation of how this will look in your specific classrooms. So hopefully these are some kind of ideas about how to do it. And another common practice, especially in smaller classes on the first day, is going around and doing names and pronouns, or doing like a pronoun go around where everyone says this is my name and I use them pronouns. And there are lots of pros and cons and things you should consider about that practice. Some pros are that it calls attention to the fact that you shouldn't assume anyone's pronouns. It makes your cis students aware that they too have pronouns that they should be sharing and that they can share, and that you can't know based on looking at someone what their pronouns would be. It also normalizes the practice of asking for pronouns as part of just a normal thing that we do. We introduce ourselves with names and pronouns. But there are, yes?
Please, there's a huge question for me, but we still have just he or she, right?
No, so I use they, them pronouns, which is an option outside of he or she. So when you talk about me, you could say oh, they led the workshop today and they have great hair. I don't know. But there's also other sets of pronouns that are used like the ze, here pronouns, which are less common but still in use. And there's actually there's a chart in your handout. It's really small. TSER is the Trans Student Educational Resources. They have a ton of great resources. And there's a chart there that kind of outlines the use of certain different pronouns. And if you're new to the variety of pronoun options that you have, there's lots of ways that you can practice, such as talking to your fish as if they use they, them pronouns. There are lots of things that you can do, or practice talking about people who who use they, them pronouns. Okay. But there are some cons to doing the pronoun go around. For example, it potentially puts students in the position to out themselves to the class if they don't feel comfortable. They might not be really sure of what pronouns they want to use, and that forces them to make a choice. And you also have to be prepared as an instructor to deal with potential comments from other students who are unfamiliar with the practice and who might not understand exactly why you're doing it. And so if you choose to do this and you take these things into consideration, there's some tips that I would kind of encourage you to think about. So importantly, to make it optional, to make pronoun sharing optional, if you say, okay, we're gonna go around, if you can say your name, your major, and your pronouns if you want, or if you're comfortable, so that students who don't feel comfortable don't feel forced to say it in that space. And if someone doesn't say their pronouns, to not follow up and be like, well, you didn't say what your pronouns were, right? Just like let them not share that information if they don't want to. Always offer your own first, so that you kind of demonstrate that you are not asking them to do anything that you wouldn't do, right? So when you start off and introduce yourself with your pronouns and model that for them. And you can do that in other ways too. You can put them in your email signature, in your syllabus, in your lecture slides if you do slides like that. So there's lots of places that you can share that information with your students. And you just need to be prepared to advocate for and support your trans and non-binary students. If they do choose to disclose their identities in your classroom, you are inviting that through that practice. And so you have to be ready to advocate for them and hold others accountable to respecting their pronouns as well. But this isn't something that just stops on the first day, right? So this is not something that I necessarily have an answer to, but thinking about how you let your students know that it's okay to update you about their name or pronouns after the first day, right? That this is not just something you do on the first day and then you forget about it. Something that you are actually integrating into the way that you use and run the classroom. It's not just an empty practice. So then this kind of, hopefully you start off on a great first note, you have done all this, you have this information about your students, but then it's not over, right? Throughout the semester, there's lots of things that you can do, such as using inclusive language beyond just pronouns. So avoiding saying things like ladies and gentlemen. There's lots of options. You can say students or all or everyone or folks or y'all if you are a y'all user. So there's lots of options to think about the ways that you're not just kind of creating these binary distinctions. And then throughout the semester, you also have to think about what you would do if a student does misgender or use the wrong pronouns for another student. And the thing to do in that moment is to recast or rephrase the original student statement. So if someone says oh, well, he said what he was saying, and then you as the instructor could say, right, like they were saying. And that demonstrates to the trans student and to everyone else in the classroom that you're going to hold the class accountable to referring to each other appropriately. And that's super important so that they know that you are, yes?
I was just going to ask, is there a general consensus on the use of guys as a neutral pronoun? Because that's what I tend to do.
Like you guys?
Yeah.
So there's not a neutral consensus. There's not. I'm from California and was also a pretty heavy guys user. Hey guys, and I would always be I use it pretty gender neutrally, but it's not for some people, right? Some people have strong gender associations with it, and so I try and take that into consideration around who I'm using it with. And so yeah, there's not an easy answer for that one. But some people think it is, right? Some people use it that way.
Saying guys and gals?
Right, but
say guys is more boys.
Right, so the idea is that a lot of words that we use as gender neutral come from a masculine place originally, whereas words that we use to refer to women don't become a neutral thing, right? Because that's more marked, right? But so if you were to say guys and gals, while you're trying to do that balancing, that creates that binary again. So I think, I still say guys because it's just sometimes, but I try and be aware of it and think about in context when I'm in class. I'm also usually maybe it's more informal than I want to be sometimes. So just hey everyone or things like that. So yeah, language stuff, misgendering stuff. Yes.
Oh, is this on? Can y'all hear me? Okay. I was just gonna say that when I catch myself saying things like "Hey guys," I try to correct myself. So I'll say "Hey guys," y'all, "Hey y'all," to try to, I might have acknowledged the guys in the room, but then to try to acknowledge everyone in the room. So it just takes practice. I catch myself all the time, but I do just try to be "Oh, hey y'all," so that way everyone is welcome in the conversation.
Yeah,
That's
same.
awesome.
Yeah, it's the same.
Yeah. It's really embedded in our brains sometimes, but it's good to practice thinking about where those come from and how to be more inclusive in our language. and it's not just about language. Like language is a big thing. I'm a linguist and I care about it a lot. But like, there's other things that you should be doing to think about like the ways that you are kind of, like for example, how you interrupt gender stereotypes, gender bias, and binary ideas of gender broadly in your classroom contexts. Also, how you are to not make generalizations or essentializing statements about men and women, like all men do this or all women do that. And then also, if you do any sort of group activity, to not separate groups into boys and girls, because that, I mean, like maybe you don't do that in college, but also it like creates this binary distinction, it excludes non-binary students, and it also might force students to pick something that they're uncomfortable with in that situation. So there's like other ways with just like broader ideas around gender that you can work to like rethink and like include trans experiences and perspectives into the conversation in your classrooms. Okay. So what happens when you mess up? Because you probably will. And you might misgender someone or use the wrong name for someone. And so what do? First, own up to it. Like acknowledge that it happened. Don't ignore it. Don't think, oh, that student probably didn't notice I said it. I'm just not going to say anything, because they probably did notice. Like they're very aware of those kind of things, or we're very aware. Correct yourself. So kind of like what Caroline was saying about, just in the moment rephrasing what you said and using, if it's a pronoun, the right pronoun. To not make excuses. To not go like, it's just so hard, they and pronouns are just so confusing, like, it just seems plural to me. Like, you don't need to go into that whole thing, like, in that moment with that person. And similarly to that, don't over-apologize. Do not be like, I'm so sorry, I'm working on it, I'm so sorry. Because it sucks. Like, when you misgender someone, you know that you've hurt that person, and that's hard and that sucks. But, like, if you are apologizing, you put that person in a position to have to say, like, I'm so sorry. No, it's okay. But it's not, right? It might not be okay. And so you're asking them to kind of comfort you and deal with your feelings around, like, processing that situation when they're the one that has been misgendered, right? And so an important thing is to continue the conversation, right? Because when you start making excuses and over-apologizing, it derails like the actual point of the conversation you were having with this person. And I'm assuming you want to be talking to them, so like you can just say, quick correction, apologize, and move on. Like, she, sorry, and continue the conversation, right? So they acknowledge that you've done it, you correct yourself, and you apologize, and just move on. Because the best way, people will frequently be like, I'm so sorry I messed up your pronouns, I'm really working on it. But the best way to show that you're working on it is to just do it right the next time, right? And so like, if you quickly like move on and do actually work on it, then you demonstrate to that person that you care about them and that you are like practicing using the correct pronouns for them and that you respect them. And to not like process it similarly with that person and like not tell them like, it's just so hard for me, because like they know that this is something that like they're aware of the baggage around like, changing your pronouns or using pronouns that are not like super familiar to people. And so if you need to like figure that out, like I said, you can practice with your fish. Like, they like swimming in the ocean or whatever. It's a fish tank, not an ocean. So these are what to do when you mess up. Any questions with all of that so far? Yeah.
Someone asked, when writing an email or letter to someone, you cannot tell the gender of the person by their first name. Should I address the email or letter to the person's first name, full name, to the person's full name?
Like, is that like if you're trying? So most likely in that context, you wouldn't be using pronouns to talk about that person because you're writing like them a direct email. But if you're trying to think about like a gendered like honorific, like Mr. or Mrs. or like another thing like that to like show respect, you could potentially you could avoid like not use those. If they have like a doctor, like you can use that. But if this is like potentially a student, then I mean, if that's the information that you have about their first name, like you should address them using their name, if that's like the context that you're emailing them in. Do people have thoughts about what to do in that context?
I try not to be overly formal with my students,
Yeah.
so I would probably just say their name at the beginning of an email.
Yeah.
Hey so and so, hey Archie,
Yeah.
blah blah blah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Shoot, Mike.
Asha, hamburger Mike.
When I've written like resume letters, cover letters, stuff like that, and I don't know the person, I don't know if they have a degree or anything, I've used their full name before, just first name, last name to address them, from what I can find online.
Yeah, and to add to that, if I'm writing to a professional, I will try to find them maybe on LinkedIn or somewhere else to see if they've disclosed them. And then you're right. Otherwise, I just use the full name.
I mean, like, so the thing about this is that, like, these don't always work, right? Like, we're operating in the world and we try and ask people their pronouns, but you don't always do so. And so it's like, how do you take these and, like, work with them and make them, like, take them into practice when you can, like, thinking about using they to refer to people who don't know their gender of, like, from the get-go, of, like, just not assuming that a person's, like, gender expression, like, maps on to a specific gender identity. But you might mess up, and if they correct you in a subsequent email, then you can just apologize and do it right next time.
Is it you refer to use both first name and last name? Is it something that you
With, I think it depends on, like, with my students, I meet them on the first day, and then I'll, after that, like, email them using their first names.
Yeah, this was.
Yeah.
Was there a recommendation for using last name also? What was the instance?
Right, so, like, before you know the name that they go by, if you use their last name, it's not like a foolproof plan, right? But, like, then, like, if you call roll using their last name. But if I'm emailing them after I've met them and I've learned their names, then I will use the name that they've told me to call them, right? Okay, so there's lots of resources that are available. I want to talk about some that are, like, on campus and in the community specifically. And there's some different ones in the handout, but you should all have access to this also at some point. So there's TSA, which is the Trans Student Alliance, which is a student group on campus that meets weekly for trans students. And so if you have a student who's looking for other trans students to connect with, that's a place you can point them. There's Tea Time at the Counseling Center, which is a therapy support group for trans students. There's also that links to the health services website with, like, the information about LGBT health services. There's the bathroom map on the website. Have any of you seen that before? So if you have access, when you get access with PowerPoint and you click on it, you can go to, like, USC's campus map, and it'll show you where all of the all-gender bathrooms are. And so that's really great information to have if you want to look at the classroom or the building that you're teaching in, and know if there's an all-gender bathroom there, if there's not, and if you let your students know, like, where the closest one might be if they don't know, or you can point them to this website as well. OMSA is a great resource. They do safe zone trainings, and then also there's a trans advocacy training, November 25th. There's a trans advocacy training. So this was 50 minutes, will be 50 minutes of information packed in. But if you want to do a more expanded thing, not necessarily just thinking about the classroom setting specifically, but that is another option for you. And it's like, you can sign up to do that on OMSA's website. And then in the community, there is at the Harriet Hancock Center, which is the LGBT Center in Columbia, there is a trans support group that has groups for trans women, trans men, non-binary people, and then, like, trans spectrum. So different, like, identity affinity groups. There's the Center for Social Equity, which does work with Black trans folks in the community. And then there's two, which are Gender Benders and Pride Link, which are both in the upstate. So those are things that you could potentially point students towards if they're looking for resources, or if you want to, like, learn more or get connected. And then in the handout, there's a couple of other, like, resources for you to learn more, not necessarily, like, different articles or books or places to look for more information if you want to dig deeper into it. Okay, so that's all of the me talking at you section. Are there any questions from that? Yeah.
I was wondering about university policies, like in terms of registration, isn't it supposed to be like one of the first steps so they can decide about their pronouns? And so in the system, they can be they should be able to just use a preferred name and preferred pronoun
Right, so there's a couple of layers to that. Actually, OMSA's website has a great, I think I linked it in the handout actually, like the LGBT students' information on the website about if a student wants to change their name on Blackboard, that's pretty easy. It's very easy to change your name on Blackboard. If you want to change your display name on your email on Outlook, that used to be available, but it's not available anymore. So that sucks. And so you can't change your assigned email address for the school until you have a legal name change. And so that's something that hopefully we can work on getting changed back, because when I first started, I was able to change my display name. And so my email says Archie, but if I were to get an email now, I would be stuck with my legal name, which is just terrible. And so it's not easy to change all of the things. And a lot of if a student hasn't legally changed their name, a lot of their official documents will have to remain under that. And there's only certain places where you indicate a preferred name.
It's not part of the university policy, USC policy. When
No.
they're registered, it's
When you register, you have to use your legal name and then indicate your name later.
Sorry. Can you provide a little bit more insight as to the Blackboard changing the display name? Because I feel good that I made my classroom an affirming space, and I have a student that has come out to me as trans. I really want to use their name, and I can tell they're kind of struggling right now because they said, no, I don't want to make it anything confusing for you. And when you're grading stuff, I know you have a lot of students. And I was like, I promise you, you're not a problem for me. But I do, if that's something that can be done discreetly with without the knowledge of parents, basically, then I would like a little bit more information on that so I can give that to them.
I can do this, right? Click on things. This is OMSA's LGBTQ resources website. Under name and pronouns, you can go to Blackboard, and it's so they have the instructions right here, actually.
Okay,
And
awesome.
so, yeah.
But that is 100% something that wouldn't be accessible by parents,
I
right?
believe so.
Yeah, FERPA.
I mean, like
FERPA, yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
On the permissions and things. If the parent if they submitted that documentation.
Right, if they waived their FERPA rights.
Right, if they waive their FERPA rights, then yes, they could access it, but it's specific to each student, because you have to take action in order to give parents that right
Okay.
when you enroll, from what I understand.
I just want to be able to give them this resource.
Yeah.
So I'm glad that you brought it up. Thank you very much.
There could also be
Great.
just the very rare occasion that a parent just has all passwords for their students' stuff. Some parents just say that that's their right to have it, whether they have a FERPA waiver or not. And so if they did in that rare occasion have their student's password, they could access that information.
Okay.
Legally, they shouldn't be able to, but sometimes it happens.
I just want to be as transparent as possible if I'm giving them this resource. I don't want them to come back and wait either of us in the front.
Well, and the changing of the Blackboard name in Blackboard is so easy.
Mhm.
You can actually, I just tried it out and I just changed my first name randomly to whatever just to see if it worked. And it was about 2-3 minutes and it updated in Blackboard, and then I changed it back. So if your student needs to give their parent access, they can change it for 45 minutes and then just put it back. So it's so easy. It has nothing to do with anyone. We have a lot of people who their email first name doesn't match to what they use. And so I'm telling faculty, I'm telling instructors, staff all the time, you can update this. So it's very, very easy.
Okay.
You have individual control of it.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Cool. Were there any other questions before we jumped into like practicing scenarios with each other? Yeah.
I probably need a microphone. So I've seen somebody they led a workshop at a convention I went to. They did this very seamlessly where, since it was a workshop and they didn't have a chance to get all of our names, all of our pronouns, etc., they used things like, okay, well, this person over here just raised a really good point. Would you recommend sometimes sidestepping those things for those of us that aren't in the humanities? And
Like
I mean, I don't want to be
lectures?
like, well, we're not in the humanities, so we don't care. But like, oh wow.
No. Question, right?
Yeah.
So, like, a lot
So
of
like, is
these
there
are-
kind of seamless? Would you recommend doing sort of a seamless way to just like pretend that we don't have pronouns and like, okay, well, this person just raised this without. Okay.
Yeah, that's a great practice. I think in general, if you, a lot of them are geared towards like smaller classes where you are getting to know your students individually, but if you have a huge lecture hall and someone raises their hand, that's a great practice to just say like that person said, or oh, the person with the red shirt, as opposed to like that lady over there, right? Like you can refer to people in other ways as opposed to just like gendering them. Yeah.
I would say our friend over here or
Oh,
our friend in the back. Friend as well.
That's super nice. Yeah. Yeah, sorry, we don't have enough time to like actually talk about it, but hopefully you can read through all of these and brainstorm what you think you might do. We have like a minute, right? So I really think maybe group 2, if you all want to share what you all talked about, I think that'd be great to. So like you ask your students to share their pronouns, and a student says, well, it's obvious. What do you say?
We over here said it's not obvious to everybody. Just tell us anyway.
Okay. Yeah. It's not obvious. Just kind of being like, okay. Mm-hmm. Any other ideas? Did anyone else do number 2?
If you're not comfortable sharing, then that's okay.
Okay. Yeah, that's great. What about number? I'm curious about number 7. Like, what do you all do? It's a famous scholar in your field has transitioned. How do you talk about trans people before they might have, if they've published before? What do you do? What do you all say?
What do you mean? Like,
Who's group 7?
That's our group. We didn't know.
Okay. Cool. Any thoughts from the group? Yeah.
As far as like identifying them with pronouns, I would use the pronoun that they go by now,
Yeah.
regardless of what maybe pronouns they used at the time that they published previously.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And if students might know the person by another name, you don't have to say the previous name, right?
Yeah.
You can say, that's correct, the person published under a different name, and then continue to use their current name without, continually saying that name that they'll use. Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
Were there any other groups who wanted to share what they had talked about with their group? Like half a minute now.
The PE folks over here we're talking about some really cool applications for number 3, like making your content more trans inclusive. I think y'all should share.
So I was talking about locker rooms are a big thing in our field right now. So something that I've done is have a bunch of different layouts for locker rooms and talking about how you would make sure this is inclusive and how you would handle it as a teacher. So I'm working with students who are learning to be teachers. Some schools are becoming more inclusive in designing their locker rooms or fixing them so that they are inclusive to everyone, and just is making an open conversation because it's something that they're all going to have to deal with. And so discussing it because it is something that's very current in our area.
That's awesome. Is that Bria time? Okay. Thank you so much for coming. If you have any questions, feel